Hi, welcome to Aberrant Behavior. I'm your host, Christabel. In this episode, we're going to talk about my healing journey. If you saw the title, it said engaged at 15 and 2 jail stints by 25. I should also add 2 divorces by 34. That's quite a resume, huh? Well, my life has been quite a life. I have come a long way, and I just want to kind of talk about what has brought me to a place of healing, what has helped me navigate it, but it's kind of hard for me to talk about where I am today without talking about where I've been. And so this is going to be like an emotional episode for me, but I think it's necessary for us to understand that we may not be alone, and we can see our life experiences in the life experiences of others, and that there is hope, that it's not once broken, always broken. So we'll start from my life as a kid who was raised by a single mom. My mom escaped her marriage to an abusive husband who was my father at 28. She had 2 kids on her hip, me, 3 years old, my brother, 1 year old. My dad beat her on a pretty consistent basis, and it got to a point where she just decided that she couldn't do it anymore. She had to leave, and she had to leave with her children. So that's what she did. She took on the difficult task of raising 2 children by herself. My dad had been the breadwinner. My mom was educated. She was a teacher, but she could not support 2 children on a teacher's salary. This was, 1988 in Nigeria, in rural Nigeria. So she decided to leave the country, move to Ghana to try to find a better life for herself and for her 2 kids, but mostly for her 2 kids. We were what she worked for. Her whole life was dedicated to making sure that we were fed, we had a house, we had a roof over our head, we had clothes on our back, we went to schools, we got a good education, and that was what she was focused on doing. So providing emotional support for us was not paramount there. But again, she can only do what she knows how to do. So I don't think she grew up receiving much emotional support from her parents either. So, I mean, how would she know how to give that? And so I have a lot of empathy in my later years towards her about that. So that led to her hustling a lot, working a lot, trying to feed us, and not being around a ton. She disciplined us in the way she knew how to. If I had an opinion about something, it was seen as disrespect. And to correct disrespect, you had to beat the kid. And I wasn't an easy kid. I think I was just perfect the way I was. As a kid, a kid is a kid, right? But my personality has always been one of questioning. I ask a lot of questions. So I asked a lot of questions and a lot of whys, and why should I do this or why should I do that? Why can't I do this and why can't I do that? I asked a lot of questions of a mother who was just trying to feed us, and she did not always handle those questions very well. So I got a lot of beating when I was growing up. And Dr. Nicole of Holistic Psychology says this: when your reality is ignored as a child, you develop certain behaviors that puts you in a place where you're accepted by your caregiver. So I developed a lot of coping mechanisms and a lot of behaviors, and those things became my sense of self in adulthood, whereas it was just coping mechanisms that I put on to protect myself and to make sure that I kept being fed and clothed by my primary caregiver, who was my mom. And in fact, a lot of the traumas that I went through, I don't even have a full recollection of. So my childhood memory is pretty shitty. Even the good ones, I can barely remember anything about myself from, let's see. I remember certain things when I was much younger, but from 10 to 14, I don't remember very much. And in therapy, I've discovered that has a lot of people who've been through pretty traumatic pasts have that experience. I got into my first relationship at 15. I was in fact engaged to a 36-year-old. Wow, right? I want to say that he was the first person I had sex with, but I don't even fully remember that because that period is such a blur in my mind. But I remember thinking, he wants to marry me. He's going to take care of me. He's going to save me from my mom, who I hated. I hated her growing up so much. We have a different relationship now. It's still pretty complex, but I definitely don't hate her. I love her. But our relationship is definitely complex. But as a 15-year-old, I was thinking, here's this man who wants to marry me. He was also a Jehovah's Witness. He was respected in the congregation. Why no one batted an eye at this, I don't understand. Why my mom didn't say, that's still something I don't fully understand. Maybe she told me that it was a bad decision and I was belligerent and still chose to accept this engagement ring from this man, a grown man. Maybe I just wasn't listening. I don't know. But what I know is that everyone knew that we were engaged and we were going to get married at some point. He was going to wait for me to get old enough for us to get married. I don't know what old enough was, but I remember I got into college fairly young. I was 16 years old when I got into college, and I think we kept waiting for me to get into college and then maybe turn 17 or 18 before we finally got married. But yeah, I was engaged to a 36-year-old as a 15-year-old. So, but while I was in college, I broke things off with him because I met someone. I met someone who became my boyfriend. I fell in love with him. I fell so madly in love with him, and he was only 18, and so, or maybe he was 19. I think he was 19. And so I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to go for the 19-year-old and ditch the 35-year-old because, the 19-year-old was in college right there with me, and he met my need for affection and attention. And so, yeah, ditched the old creepy man, ditched him for my new, younger, more fabulous boyfriend. But yeah, I just basically went from relationship to relationship from as young as I can remember. So from 15, this is kind of fast forwarding, but like from 15 to 34, I was in relationships. And that's not even an exaggeration. Maybe there was 6 months in there that I was not in some kind of relationship. But even then, I feel like I was probably still talking to people. So all I did was relationships, chasing something. I don't, chasing love and affection and belonging. And that's just what I kept doing. So in the previous episode, I talked about moving to the US at 21. And that was because my boyfriend, my new boyfriend, my 19-year-old boyfriend had moved to the US. And so I decided to come here with him. And so, yeah, I did that. I came to the US. We lived in Chicago. Within a year of being in the US, he and I got into a physical altercation. I was very cantankerous. I don't know what other word to say. I had a lot of violent tendencies. I was a very angry person. I was a very angry young woman. I was always down to like, yeah, let's do this. Like, whatever. I'm not scared of you. You ain't going to talk to me that way. You are not going to treat me that way. Bring it on. That's basically how I lived my life for a really long time. And so when we got into that physical altercation, it was in public. So what that meant was that I think someone called the cops on us. And then we both went to jail. We both made bail that next day, but that was my first stint. We were both charged with domestic violence. It was thrown out. We were not convicted or anything like that. It was thrown out, and then I broke up with him because I realized that was not going to work. We had too many differences. We were basically kids when we met, and at this point we had outgrown each other. And to continue in that was just continuing in a destructive pattern. So I broke up with him, and I moved out on my own. This was in 2007, my first year in the U.S. I had just finished my first year in the U.S. I moved out on my own and, started working and then eventually started working towards getting a nursing degree. Because if you know anything about Africans, we become nurses in the U.S. No matter what we were back home. When we come to the U.S., we basically become nurses and a few other things, but nurses for sure. Fast forward to 2008. This was a year later. I had met another man I was introduced to someone who was a Jehovah's Witness as well. He looked great on paper. He was ambitious. He had his head on straight, and we decided to get married. We dated for a year. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you date with a view to marriage. So we dated from 2008. And actually, we got married 2 years later. We got married in 2010. So we got married and moved from Chicago to Indiana to pursue our education. He was going to business school, and I got into a nursing program in Indiana. So we moved to Indiana 2010, and not even 6 months into the marriage, we got into a physical altercation. He had tried to choke me, and I busted him in the head. I called 911. I was so terrified because I could not breathe, and I defended myself, but I certainly wasn't without fault in that relationship. Again, I still continued in the same disturbed pattern. It was basically, I was becoming my dad, essentially. A lot of anger, a lot of angst against the world. I couldn't name it then. I just thought that was what I had to do, and that's just how it was. And that's just how it was. That's just who I was, because that's what I had heard for a really long time growing up about how messed up I am. So that's just what I thought. And I just kept replaying those patterns and those stories over and over and over again. So it didn't matter the relationship. The same pattern was prominent. So yeah, we both went to jail. And I was in nursing school at this time, living in a small town. The arrest was published in the papers. I remember that. So when we went to church, everyone at church knew. It was very embarrassing. It was a very traumatic time, even though I didn't even realize how traumatic it was. But this was only 6 months into our marriage. We still ended up staying married for 4 years. In total, after I graduated from nursing school and he graduated from business school, we moved to California. We moved to Berkeley because he had gotten a job, and we were going to make it work. We were going to try to make it work because that's what you did as a Jehovah's Witness. The only grounds for divorce is infidelity, adultery, and death. Those are the only 2 grounds. So regardless of how traumatic and how abusive the relationship was, the marriage was, we did not feel like we had any choice but to stay in it. But towards the end of the marriage, I was, okay. So I've always known I was gay. As a 12-year-old girl who was like curious about vaginas, I knew I liked women. That was not a secret to me. But this is what religion and culture and environment does. It does a very good job of suppressing the desires and the urge to do anything about those desires. So even though I knew I liked women from before I knew what being a lesbian was, I did not pursue it. I did not do anything. I didn't have this angsty teenage years where I liked girls and I couldn't do anything about it. I had little things like when I was in college and I would be like, oh, she's cute, or, oh, like I wish I could touch her or whatever. So I had those moments in college, but I was a witness. I was living in Ghana where being homosexual is illegal and punishable by death, by up to death. And I was being raised by a pretty fearful mother, or a mother whom I feared. So I just never pursued anything. So come back to the last year of my marriage with my husband, my ex-husband. I began to have these urges come back up very, very strongly, very strongly. I could not ignore them this time around. So, yeah, we got divorced for many reasons, but certainly one of them was I was no longer interested in being in the marriage. I was no longer interested in having sexual relations with him. I just didn't want to have sex with him anymore. I did not get anything from it, and I did not want to continue the charade. At that time, I met my ex-girlfriend, and we started a relationship. And after that happened, I just went ahead and we ended the marriage. I had to. It was a pretty difficult divorce. It was a very contentious divorce, and it was a pretty difficult time in my life. I had to move back to Indiana because I had gone to nursing school there. So I knew the hospital was going to give me a job. So I moved back to Ghana. I moved back to Indiana, and I broke up with my girlfriend at the time because it wasn't going to work. There was just so much guilt and so much trauma from that really abusive relationship. And I was very angry at that point. I was in a very angry point of my life where it was just burn it all down. I didn't give a fuck about nothing. I was pretty destructive. I hurt a lot of people. It was very difficult. So after I moved to Indiana, I still did not start working on myself. I didn't know I was in church. I mean, that should be enough. Reading the Bible and going to Bible studies and going out preaching, and that should be enough, right? But no, it wasn't. I was still just living in a life that other people had envisioned for me. So I just did not work on myself on a deep level. But I was single. That was the longest I had stayed single. It was 8 months or so before I met my next girlfriend, who became my wife. I stayed single for about 8 months, and then I met my ex-wife, and that was just the best. That was just the best time. Initially, I loved her so much. It was my first time being in a relationship with a woman that I could own completely, that I was absolutely in love with a woman and loved having sex with a woman and wanted to build a life with a woman. So that was a pretty exciting discovery, but it was still me, right? The me who had not done the work, who did not even know where to start with the work. So the beginnings of our relationship was marred with a lot of that residual anger that I had. So it was a tough first 8 months. And I think after that first 8 months, I was like, yo, Christabel, this keeps happening to you. This keeps happening in every relationship you've ever been in. You are the common denominator. You do not want to lose this woman. And if you don't do something about your temper and your ways, you are going to lose her. And that was that my desire to hold on to her was the biggest catalyst I had to looking into doing the work I needed to do to become a better version of me. I was terrified of losing her. I did not think it was fair to be this person towards her, especially when a lot of the anger that I had nothing to do with her. I was very, very depressed at that point. I had suicidal ideations. I had started self-harming. I was cutting. And it was just going to get really, really bad eventually if I did nothing. So I got my butt in therapy. I mean, I knew of therapy in a very peripheral way, but because I had religion, I didn't think I should pursue anything else, right? But here I was living with a woman, so I wasn't doing that perfectly. So the next best option for me was to look into psychotherapy. That's what I figured. And at that time we were living in the Bay Area. So I found a therapist. I went online, researched, found a therapist in Berkeley, and I started therapy. And I took to it like fish to water. Is that how that goes? Fish to water? Yeah. So I took to therapy so well. That was what I had been missing. Someone who felt like my person, someone to listen to me, hear me, tell me that, reassure me that I was not irreparably broken. That just really made me emotional, because that was the first time I felt like I was heard. That I wasn't just this broken, angry, violent person who wouldn't amount to anything, who would not be able to have fulfilling, intimate relationships. And I was going to say, dear Thomas, he has been my therapist for the last 5 years. And I have learned so much about my strength, my worthiness, my innate worthiness. And I owe so much to him and to therapy. And that's why I'm so passionate about making therapy accessible to people. Because many people, especially if you're a Black woman or a Black person, and even more so an African person, therapy is for white folks, right? It's not what we do. It's just not what we do. That's the narrative. And I just want to help other people like me to, especially if you've ever felt broken or felt that you weren't good enough, to let you know that there are ways to work towards becoming who you want to be, who you've always been, for that matter, before all the trauma that made you take on these characteristics so that you stay protected and not hurt. That therapy is effective. It's not the only way, but it is a pretty good tool. It's a pretty good tool. And it's not judgmental, at least my experience with it. If you find the right therapist for you, it's not judgmental. It's supportive. It's loving. It's the best thing I've ever done for myself, and that I continue to do for myself. It's an investment, but thankfully, as the years go on, there are cheaper and more accessible ways to get therapy, and I'm going to include some links in the description and also you can always reach out to me. If you want to talk, I can't give you advice. I don't give advice. That's one thing I don't do. In that I don't I'm only going to be able to speak from my perspective. And I think that it's important to get professionals who have been trained to look at these issues from an objective lens, or as objective as they can get from an objective lens, to help you without inserting their own, biases in there. And that's what I'm going to be doing for you, inserting my own biases. And I think that you deserve better than that. So yeah, so that's basically, and that's basically what has brought me to where I am today. As many of you know me today, I haven't always been this way. And 5 years into therapy, I'm ever evolving. I'm ever learning. I'm ever growing. I'm ever changing and morphing into the woman I have always been inside, into that child, that pure child that I was before societal and parental conditioning happened. And I'm so excited for that journey. And in addition to therapy, I have other things that I do. I will probably mention the holistic psychologist a million times throughout these podcasts, because she has been instrumental in understanding certain things, such as inner child trauma, codependency, ego work. She has been really instrumental in that. So I really recommend her. There goes an advice. I gave you an advice. Check out the holistic psychologist. I journal, I meditate. I'm no longer religious, but I've never been more spiritual. I'm learning how to use tarot, trusting my intuition more, because my intuition is, it's good, and learning to trust it more and more, learning so many other things, like connecting with nature and just growing in a way that because I feel like if I get better, the world gets better. I'm able to approach the world through a lens of empathy and compassion and grace and care. And because I think that's really what the point is of it all. It's not just about self-development, but without that self-development, we cannot be contributors to the world to the best of our ability. And so there was a lot of pain. There has been a lot of pain. I wanted to do this episode just to give you an overview of this imperfect person who is just here in community with you, to grow with you, to share my experiences with you. The whole podcast is not going to be about it's not going to be about all my traumas. This is just one thing that I thought was really important to establish off the bat who I am in totality, versus just saying I'm a nurse and this and that and the other. I just wanted to make sure that the introduction is proper and thorough and honest and vulnerable. And yeah, you know a little bit more about me now. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to the privilege of affording therapy, the privilege of knowing you need therapy, because that's another layer. But that's it for now. That's it for this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. We're going to get into, I don't know what we're going to get into. We'll get into what we get into. Yeah? Let's connect later.